All right. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this July 21st meeting of the Charlotte City Council Budget and Effectiveness Committee. We'll start off with introductions. My name is Ed Driggs. I chair the committee. If the other committee members would introduce themselves, please.
Julie Eisel, committee member.
Shmira, committee member.
Renee Johnson, committee member.
Mr. Graham? I guess he'll join us. Could people in CH14 please introduce themselves?
Greg McDowell, City Auditor.
And Donata Jackson, Office of Constituent Services.
Patrick Baker, City Attorney.
Good. Is that all in the room?
Marie Harris, Strategy and Budget.
All right. And who else do we have on the call from the city?
This is Ryan Bergman, Budget Director.
Kelly Flannery, Chief Financial Officer.
Howard Jayova,
Peter Adams, City Internal Audit.
Brent Cagle, Aviation Director.
You got everybody?
Oh, sorry, Jennifer Smith, General Services.
Phil Rieger with General Services.
Hey, Phil. Good. All right. If everybody could please mute your phones. I wanted to say first, I listened in on a meeting that just took place in the Community Safety Committee, talking about a potential referral to Budget and Effectiveness. Just wanted to say we will consider that when the referral has been provided, but I don't feel we are in a position to talk about it today. So we'll take that up when the referral itself has been defined and given to us so we know exactly what that is going to be about. We do have 3 items on our agenda today: prioritizing projects funded by hospitality, internal audit, up-to-date and briefing, and city council resolutions. So I'd like to hand over to Ryan Bergman to take the first topic.
Sure. So as Mr. Driggs mentioned, we have 3 topics today. I'll go over them real quickly and then turn it over to Kelly to actually start the first one. The 3 topics, we have a referral from the retreat on vetting tourism projects. So the task is to discuss developing or improving the process around vetting hospitality-funded projects. As you're aware, hospitality-funded projects have different state restrictions. So Kelly Flannery, who's a co-staff support for this committee with myself, will provide some background and then seek council input. Second, we'll turn it over to our internal auditor, Greg McDowell, to talk about an internal audit briefing, which will primarily be about a fairly significant internal audit that they are due to complete. So early last year, we were trying to make a lot of improvements and redesign the capital process to avoid some of the mistakes that were made in the past. So Greg has a very thorough document. He's going to talk about it a little bit today. We appreciate that it's been a really collaborative process with city staff, which has allowed us to work to improve a lot of the things already in this document over the last year and a half. It also provides some further areas that we can continue to improve and get better. Finally, we'll turn it over to our city attorney, Patrick Baker, to talk about a February referral that we had that we would have taken up. However, our March committee meeting did get canceled. It's on council resolutions. So we'll put the resolution on the screen so you can refamiliarize yourself, and Patrick will lead the discussion there. So with that, if it's all right, Mr. Driggs, I'll turn it over to Kelly to start the first topic.
Kelly, go ahead.
Thank you. Thanks, Wendy. If you just want to skip to the next slide, as Budget Director Bergman just mentioned, this concept was born out of the retreat back in January, both to try and kind of codify some of the existing policies and procedures that we have and identify opportunities to increase transparency and make sure everyone's getting the most out of the process. So I think before we get too deep into next steps, I just want to give everyone an overview reminder of how hospitality funds work and the uses for them. So Wendy, I'm on the next slide. One more. Thanks. So as Ryan said, the state legislation defines how tourism and hospitality revenues can be used. And as a city, both in the budget and in our annual financial report, we account for them in 3 different funds. That's the Convention Center Fund, the Tourism Fund, and the Hall of Fame Fund. These are not general operations. These are special revenue funds of the city. And for the Convention Center, that's obviously funding for Convention Center, as well as that's where your Bank of America stadium-related cost lives, amateur sports, soccer would live in Convention Center funding as well. And then tourism is just that. It's the convention and visitor promotion, as well as the Levine campus, Discovery Place, more of the cultural facilities. And then Hall of Fame is obviously just the NASCAR Hall of Fame facility. And on the next slide, this is just a summary of the budget that was just approved back in June. Primarily, hospitality revenues currently are used for debt service and CRVA promotion and marketing and facility maintenance. As it relates to the Convention Center Fund, typically about 70% of annual revenues cover just the debt service and the maintaining of existing facilities. And then all of the marketing money that we give to CRVA comes out of the Convention Center Fund. None of the other funds contribute to those dollars. So the revenue sources for Convention Center are primarily what we call the second 3% occupancy tax, as well as food and beverage. And then the uses, as I mentioned, primarily debt service, primarily facility maintenance. And the tourism fund, that's the first 3% occupancy tax, rental car, portion of You Drive It, some money from the county. It's more of a hodgepodge of dollars there. And that goes to the maintenance of ovens, Spectrum, Levine, some baseball stadium parking costs are in there. And then the NASCAR is the final 2% occupancy tax, with the total 8% occupancy tax. And that is the only real revenue source in that fund. And that's exclusively funding debt service, maintenance, and from time to time capital projects at the NASCAR Hall of Fame. So on the next slide, just wanted to give folks a reminder of what CRVA does and their role for the city. They're the region's, trying to bring conventions here and promote visitor spending and opportunities for the community and economic development. The annual economic impact's about $1 billion. And their board is 13 members that are actually selected and approved by the mayor and city council. There's a mix of people. There's, I think, 3 or 4 hospitality professionals currently that sit on that board. And their major function is not just sales and marketing, but it's the operation of the city's venues. And it's important to note that they are a component unit of the city. So that means they appear in our financials, but they have their own standalone budget system and their own standalone financial policies. They usually have an annual budget of around $70 million. About half of that $70 million comes from hospitality revenues, and the other half comes from revenue they generate from hosting events. And their budget is approved by the CRVA Board of Directors, but typically it's also presented to City Council every year. Similar to the city, they maintain a 16% operating reserve or fund balance. That is not to be confused with the city's fund balances for these funds. They're different numbers. So their fund balance isn't exclusively hospitality revenues. It's whatever revenues they may have generated in the year that are left over.
So Kelly, they also receive money from us through our financial partners allocations, don't they?
That's the same dollars, that's correct. So those dollars are statutorily required per the state statute, as well as contracts that were entered into many years ago on how those contributions are made. But it's typically, Ryan, correct me, but I think the number is 10 million annually in tourism and promotion numbers. Well, actually, I think I have it in the prior slide. 10.2.
Yeah, thank you.
Mm-hmm. And then just a little bit about the current process. So when we think about hospitality projects or investments, it's maintaining.
Kelly, I have Julie Iselt has her hand up. Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Kelly, I just had a question on the fund balance, the reserve balance for CRVA. When you said 16%, I know in the case of the city, that's, double what we are required to have. And that has a lot to do with our bond rating, but CRVA wouldn't be in that same position in terms of, right? I mean, they wouldn't be impacted by a rating agency. So how did they arrive at that 16% number? And is that the right number?
Yeah, I think so. The CRVA doesn't hold any debt. We do. So they obviously don't have their own ratings. But these are economically sensitive tax revenues in a way different from our general fund, which is primarily property tax and sales tax. And property tax is extremely reliable. Sales tax is a little volatile. But the hospitality revenues, as we're seeing now, are extremely volatile. So 16% or about 2 months operating, I think, is really the appropriate level for them to have.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
So when we look at the type of investments, we have the city-owned assets and facilities, as well as P3s and intergovernmental relationships. So that would be agreements, whether it's with, a Discovery Place type agreement or something with the county when you're looking at the Memorial Stadium agreements, or the events, like most recently PGA, the NBA All-Star Game. Those types of investments are all things that get funded out of hospitality. And we look at the priority. Our current priority is we obviously pay our current obligations first. So we have agreements beyond just debt service requirements. We have agreements with the Hornets, with the Spectrum Center, that will maintain facilities. And then the second piece is the city-owned assets. So we don't want to run into disrepair on our own facilities. So that's the second kind of in our waterfall. And the third is whatever discretionary investments we identify after all existing commitments have been honored. When we look at investments, the things we look at obviously are legal compliance is the most important. We look at the return on the investment. What's it bringing to the city, in the short term and the long term? Maximize inclusion for diversity, MWSBE, job creation, not just as part of construction, but ongoing. And how is it going to support tourism and economic development? Right now, the CRVA Convention Center is a Tier 2 destination category. That's among one of their biggest priorities is maintaining that Tier 2. So that's a criteria we look at a lot, as well as support from external stakeholders, not just City Council and CRVA, but also hospitality industry professionals. And does this support the commitments that we've made to that industry? And then financial policies. Obviously, we want to make sure it's affordable. We have 100% of next year's debt service requirement, which means we always self-restrict the portion of next year's debt service that's available, and we maintain robust fund balance. And so with all those things that we're currently doing, I think if we turn to the next slide, we kind of look to you at this point, and how do we want to codify those things? How can we expand on those things? And what's the appropriate next steps and checkpoints with council to make you feel comfortable that we have a valid and transparent process?
So Kelly, you and I spoke yesterday, and I think one thing that we need to clarify for the benefit of committee members is our experience has been that the CRVA brings to us a proposal for certain capital investments, like Discovery Place or whatever. And what I'm trying to get straight in my own mind is, are the things that we need to talk about relevant to what they do in terms of capital budgeting, or are you talking about decisions that originate with City Council?
I mean, I defer to council. It was your charge. I believe that the request was CRVA specific, but I do think there's an opportunity, specifically as it relates to the financial policies. There are things we do in practice, but we've never actually put the pen to the paper and written them down. I think this is a nice time to do those things together. So I guess I could go either direction, but I think there's room to kind of codify some of the things we've got out there already.
Right, but I'm still struggling with this. That referral came because things were coming to us and we were being asked to vote on them. And I think some of us did not have a sense that we really understood the context in which those decisions were being made. what the pipeline was of capital projects that CRBA was budgeting for, and what the implications were if we approved additional funding for one project in terms of maybe a delay in the timing of another one. So I'm still trying to create this sort of tie-in to the process that results in a proposal being brought to us, and the things that you're talking about here. I mean, maybe we should have, Tom Murray or somebody actually help us with this. But the criteria that you're talking about that we need to discuss relate specifically to those investments of hospitality funds in capital projects, right?
That's correct.
So I don't know, other committee members chime in here, but my impression is that a lot of that, like convention center, not sure about soccer, but a lot of that is sort of brought to us as a result of a process that appears to be taking place within the CRBA. And by the time it reaches us, we have asked questions in the past about, okay, what other things do you have? We got some information. Tracy provided some. But I think the thrust of this referral was, could you help us to understand better when we're being asked to vote on one of these things, which did not originate on council, then how can we decide? What should we use as reference points? So I think the idea that we establish the criteria for investments and that we are more thoughtful about how we define our priorities and so on could also apply to our CIP process as well as to capital investments from hospitality funds. But it's almost like those are two different questions. I mean, do you think that some of the things we're talking about here would be applicable to our capital budgeting decisions in the CIP?
First, I should have prefaced by saying that before we put this presentation together, we did sit down, finance, budget, and strategy and budget, economic development, and CRVA, and they're very willing, everyone, to participate in this. So, and Tom is fully willing to, participate in future meetings. I think we just thought for the first one, it was kind of gauge where council was at and then kind of see next steps from there. But as it relates to your question, I don't know, maybe I defer to Ryan a little bit. I don't think there's a direct relationship. There's such different projects and different process. I mean, there's usually a capital stack where it's not just the one funding source, whether it be, COPS, GEO, or debt service reserves, or PAYGO. It's usually a stack of a whole bunch of stakeholders, and it's a very different process. So I guess I would lean towards they're different, but Ryan, you've got more longevity here than I do. Maybe you can provide color.
Sure. I think that anytime we get feedback from you guys on the appropriate touch points that you would like while balancing the ability to keep things moving towards a proposed budget, looking far ahead with our planning fund, things of that nature, even if we're not directly discussing the capital piece from this referral, it helps us understand the touch points that would be appropriate for you guys and the types of information that you'd be looking for.
Well, let's take, for an example, soccer, right? So we made we gave an indication that we were prepared to commit $110 million to soccer, subject to the completion of satisfactory agreements. Was that all of that negotiated by our economic development people, or by the CRBA, or by both?
It's my understanding it was primarily the city manager's office /ED.
Right. And I think as far as council is concerned on that one, for example, we didn't really have any reference points in terms of like a quantitative analysis or an assessment of financial returns. It was kind of like Major League Soccer is good, and here are a couple of exciting reasons, economic impact and so on. But so are we talking here about the possibility of actually being a little more rigorous when we assess an opportunity like that?
That would be my recommendation.
Right. So I guess I just ask members of the committee, how would you like to move forward on this? Is anybody excited about this? Or I see Ms. Ajmera has her hand up. Go ahead.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, and I thought that was the charge for the committee, is to figure out how do we address each request that comes in for the funding. So there's got to be some metrics that we got to come up with to analyze each proposal that comes forward that addresses certain metrics, but then also addresses some of our community goals and our rate of return on our investment. So I think as a committee, we got to discuss this. What are some of the things that we would like to see in a given proposal?
That was kind of my thought too. I think what we could talk about is what type of information council would like to receive. I don't really see us going down into the weeds and replicating all the cash flow analysis or whatever, but what would a format be for a presentation to council that was just a little more rigorous and gave us a better ability to assess like the cash on cash return, the social return, and the priority that this is being given, where it fits into a plan of capital investment. I'm happy to let the staff do some of the work, Kelly, that you're talking about here. I guess the committee could think about whether we want to give instruction to the staff as to what we think they should think about. But I don't think on the level of council, we're all going to be sitting down with spreadsheets and critiquing the numbers analysis that is done by the staff. So, Ms. Ajmera, does that sound right to you?
Yes, certainly. I don't think we will be doing the actual analysis. The staff will be doing that and providing us the results. What I would like to see, anytime the proposal is brought forward, that we are given fund balance information, not just being presented, but actual spreadsheet that we can look at. What are our existing commitments that's been approved by council? Here is our fund balance, so that we can look at the numbers. And I don't think that information is currently given. It's sort of been, we are given a presentation, but we don't actually have a spreadsheet where we can say, okay, here is all our commitment, here is our fund balance after we deduct all of these commitments, and ultimately this is the number that we currently have in order for us to take more debt commitments or even other commitments.
Right, and the manager and Mayor Pro Tem, I see you there. One sec. The manager has come up with this notion for our capital spending, our CIP spending, of like a permanent capacity for debt, which is meant to provide a context in terms of what resources we have to work with. We know that the tourism funds, I think, have over $100 million in total revenues, although I think we just said 70. But in any case, we really don't know much about how they go about deciding which thing to do first and how much they have room for. Mayor Pro Tem.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. I think you just hit on it. I think that's the question that always comes up, is we don't really know how those decisions are made. I'm not comfortable with the idea of having the council look at an ROI and determining if that's the right number. To Ms. Ajmera's point, I don't think that's really productive for these kinds of situations. But at any given time, we don't know where we stand with cash flow, future obligations, what else even might be coming down the pipe, that kind of thing. So it always feels like we're making these decisions in a vacuum without really being given the benefit of all the information.
Right, and the assumption is that a lot of this information does exist, that it was considered by the people who developed the proposal that comes to us. It's just a question of what things we should be allowed to see. And I know one of the issues has always been, in my conversations with Ron Kimball in the past, especially, well, we don't want to kind of communicate to the world at large what we're thinking about or how much money we might have earmarked for the discovery place or whatever. So I guess we have to reconcile that. But Kelly, I would say to you, I think that the thing that's of greatest concern to us is just getting enough information as a result of the analysis for us to be able to make responsible decisions. And in a way, the question of whether or not we like how the analysis is being done is a separate issue. And I think it could be a tough one for council to tackle, frankly. I don't know whether, we've got career people who run these numbers and do all this analysis, and people on council have different backgrounds. So I would be inclined to sort of trust the work they're doing and just say, share more of it with us so that when we're asked to vote on something, we're in a position where we could defend whatever we decided to do.
Mr. Driggs?
Yes.
I agree with you. I'd like to make one comment on a ratio we should consider is like at what point we say that this is too much debt that we can this is too much debt than we would like to see if it commits our future obligations. So maybe as a budget committee we can set a policy in place around how much debt that we should have or council feels comfortable with. So that at least it gives direction to staff that, hey, council may not be comfortable committing too much if it increases our debt to asset or debt to value ratio.
Yeah, I mean, it's the same sort of conversations you would have on a board, right? Like a nonprofit
Exactly.
board or where you're sort of monitoring the finances and the obligations at a high level, and you have a stewardship responsibility. I do think, Kelly, that there are things that might be of concern to you that you could bring to us by way of improvements to how this analysis is being done before we see it. And the committee would be quite happy, I'd be quite happy to talk about that with you and move it forward. But I don't think the ideas for how we should change the way it's done are going to come from this group. Does that make sense?
That's perfect. I got ideas.
Okay, good. Well, let's, for the moment then, if you could focus on thinking about what information council receives in the context of a capital spending proposal, and that would give us a good basis for making a decision. And you've heard from Ms. Ajmera and the Mayor Pro Tem. And then we can talk some more about ideas that you have for a change in analytical procedures. And I think we would bring them up as a suggestion to the committee, and we can react to that. But we're not going to be the authors of that. So if everybody is okay on that topic, Ms. Ajmera, your hand is still up. I assume that you didn't mean to speak again.
I'm going to lower it.
All right, thank you. Good. So, Ryan, why don't we move on to Chapter 2?
Sure, we'll introduce.
Thank you, Kelly.
Sorry, introduce Greg McDowell, our internal auditor here.
Good afternoon, council members.
Good afternoon, Greg.
Happy to be here, even under these unusual circumstances. Your agenda calls for me to talk about an audit report that we've completed and we'll be issuing soon. Let's go back to that. Keep it on the front. First slide, please. If we have a chance, we'll talk to you about our audit summary and our audit plan. Those items can always be found online. We post all things internal audit related, our audit plan, our accomplishments to date, our peer review, which is required for us to follow government auditing standards. And first, I'd like to reintroduce virtually, Tina Adams introduced herself, my deputy auditor. She's been with me for 22 years. And then probably lurking online is also audit supervisor Craig Terrell. And those two were key to completing this audit report that I'm going to talk to you about. And for those of you who are new to internal audit, or just to refresh your memories, I want to talk about how we get to this point to bring an audit report to you. First, we develop our plan, And my audit group does risk assessment. We obtain input from departments. And then, of course, we also receive city manager requests. Over the years, I would say that the audit plan has been 90% our very own ideas of, after doing risk assessment and paying attention to what's happening in the city and just being aware of audit issues. And then departments request specific audits. And then on occasion, the city manager will ask for an audit, and that's in this case. So next slide. In this case,
Greg, just to be clear, you are an internal audit function, right? So you're not speaking for an auditing firm. This is not to be confused with our external audit that we conduct of our annual financials.
Correct. I'm your city auditor, which is internal audit, and I've been with you for over 22 years. And I mentioned my two top people who worked on this report, so that if there's anything you want to compliment or say positively about, it accrues to Tina Adams and Craig Terrell. If you have questions, concerns, or you think we didn't answer everything we should have, then that's my responsibility. So as I said, this was the city manager's request, and as Ryan even mentioned back, because the final report that we'll issue later this week and that you'll receive soon will be around 100 pages long. And so, again, with the nature of audit, we focus on how we can improve. And there are areas that we can improve upon, but as Ryan said at the beginning, a number of staff have already taken our recommendations, taken our discussion, and come up with things on their own. The things that the city is doing better today than they were when we started looking at this in 2019 are not necessarily just because of internal audit. Internal audit didn't recommend the advanced planning and design program, but we recognize it as a key thing that the city is doing now that helps you better understand and helps us focus better. Next slide. It has been a significant effort. Our scope was to look at 5-year plans, review current and past practices. We've looked at a number of case studies, projects that were completed many years ago and that were going on recently. And so this case study analysis, we have addressed things like the Cross Charlotte Trail, the Joint Communications Center, the Charlotte Convention Center. But our report was not to perform a rigorous autopsy or look back on the specific projects. We looked at enough projects to form opinions as to how we can improve things going forward. And so to do that, we focused on, we used guidance from the Government Finance Officers Association and the Project Management Institute to help us formulate our ideas. We also hired 2 outside companies, Towson Solutions and RSM, to look at specific projects for us. And their reports will stand alone, but are appendices to our overall report. Next slide. So again, at a 30,000-foot level, and again, telling you that there's 22 recommendations, and each recommendation had responses from usually 3 to 5 different departments. We have a total of 8 departments who have responded to our recommendations, and so we have 68 responses that actually address this, and so that has contributed to the amount of time that it's taken us to put it all together and give people a chance to respond, decide if they were going to take actions immediately. Obviously, some things would take quite a while to dive into. So at the 30,000-foot level, project selection and advanced planning, and we said that project budgets have been established without sufficient design. And so we recommended some planning decisions be documented better, establish the selection process for the advanced planning and design program. So that was after I'm calling it the AD and DP was established. We want them to improve upon that. And so strategy and budget is going to document that. And we're satisfied that the advanced planning program does address some previous risks. Next slide.
Chairman?
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you. Mr. McDowell, it's always great to hear from you. I love your presentation each time. Because you bring something new that we don't know about. Have you seen challenges in your previous slide? You mentioned where you send questions or surveys to departments. Have you had challenges getting responses, or is that not the case?
Well, I didn't mean to imply that at all. I just meant it was a large undertaking and to obtain the responses from sometimes as many as 5 or 6 departments to one recommendation we had. We wanted to have a robust conversation. And so sometimes there was some back and forth conversations, phone calls, emails. And so I wouldn't say, other than the fact that, we've all been dealing with some extra special circumstances for the last few months. And so it maybe took a little bit longer to kind of wrap things up because people were being drawn in different directions. Everyone has been very cooperative. Everyone understands, especially when the city manager asks us to do a specific audit, that they're going to be cooperative, they're going to be helpful. And actually I'll go ahead and tell you now, out of the 68 responses that we received, there's only 4 that I would classify as being not accepted or disagreement. And that's okay for auditors to disagree with people that we're recommending that they change things. And sometimes the disagreement were kind of minor, like, well, yes, maybe we need to do something better, report better, but we don't like the recommendation the solution that you might have raised. And so as often as we can, we hear other people's alternate solutions and inject those into our reports. And so sometimes I like to tell people, we're not taking credit for everything you've already decided to do, but our independent view gives us an opportunity to raise questions and say, can we do this better? And so I went on at length, but the answer to your question was there was not a problem getting responses from departments.
Fair enough. Could you send us, at the end of this presentation, or it might be part of this presentation, the list of audits your department has conducted so far in 2020 and in 2019, all the audits that you all have done at the request of city manager's office? And has in the past, have there been a scenario where the internal audit request came from city council, or it just goes through the manager's office?
Requests come through the city manager's office. I've heard council members talk about audits sometimes, and so we certainly pay attention to that as to what would be important for the city. But overall, 90% of the audits that we initiate are a result of my staff and I doing our own risk assessment, looking to see what's important to the city, what's important to council. And again, there have been a few requests, this one being the most significant. A couple of years ago, I wanted to do an audit, and there's certain types of audits you shouldn't do unless management, really wants you to take a look at it. And so sometimes I'd sit down and say, here's something I think would be useful, and if you embrace that, then I'll move forward. But it's important for us to be independent. We're audited. You say, well, who audits the auditors? And that's we're required to have external review of our work. It's called a peer review. And if we don't have that done at least every 3 years, we can't say that we're following government auditing standards. And that's key, I think, to our being able to claim to be independent.
So let me just mention there, we do have, at least on an annual basis, this committee receives a report from the internal auditor that covers a lot of the things that you're talking about, Ms. Ajmira. Talks about the audits they conducted, reports on their activity, and the projects they're looking at. If possible, I'd like to stay focused on the report that we're getting today, because I think this is actually important information. You know how many conversations we've had in the past about our capital process and some of the things that happened, like the Cross Charlotte Trail. And what we're seeing here is an assessment of what some of the issues may have been that gave rise to those. So I want to just make sure we do justice to this topic. And by all means, you should get that report you requested. But tell us more about your conclusions, Greg.
Okay, we're on slide 6 of 10, and so we're actually moving along. And I'll just point out that we'll send you the documents you asked for, but they're also online, not just internally on CNET, but they're also available to the public. We post monthly updates as to how we're progressing on our audit plan. The audit plan for the next 2 years is actually online. And so that information is there, but happy to send it to you directly. So looking here at estimating, we said we need some cost estimating standards that are citywide. Each department has their own approach, and our recommendation is that we become more consistent and establish those so everyone's playing by the same rule book. And so we had findings and recommendations about the need for independent cost estimates prior to submittal to council. especially for the high dollar, high risk projects. And we pointed out that we had a couple projects. One was the JCC and the other was the Convention Center, where the subcontractor bids exceeded the budget or the original estimates, significant dollars, and we recommend that in that type of case, that an independent cost estimator be brought in. And so,
Greg,
yes.
could you comment quickly on what construction manager at risk means and what the alternatives are to us for contracting? Like, this is one way in which we can do business with contractors. What is it, and what are the alternatives?
Sure, and Section E focuses on that specifically, but the difference.
Okay, well, if you're coming to it.
Well, I'll go ahead and mention that the key ones are design, build, design, bid, build, and then CMAR, as we call it, construction manager at risk. And it's interesting. It's an interesting approach, interesting delivery method. And we've had lengthy discussions with people as to how they decide which method to choose under what circumstances. And so we'll talk more about that when I get to E.
Okay.
But again, on estimating, General Services agreed with us about seeking independent cost estimates as recommended. So next slide. C, and still, again, staying at the 30,000 foot level, because once you all read, pages 1 through 102, I'm sure you might want to call me up and have some further discussions. So cost management and delivery. And in this regards, we actually devoted a page or two to discussing some projects that had been delivered very successfully to the city. But again, auditors do tend to focus on what can we do to improve. And so we have some project management controls, but they're not consistently documented. And we recommended establishing the criteria for selecting the appropriate method. And we also pointed out that the cost of staff time on capital projects hasn't been accurate or complete. Or consistent, actually, among the departments. Each department has taken a little bit different approach over the years. And as you can see on actions taken and planned, General Services is going to evaluate that. Strategy budgets and budget department is working with the departments to establish a consistent and accurate methodology. Slide D, next slide, performance reporting. The city has been decentralized in its approach, or at least it has historically been that way. What I've seen over the last year or so is an improved process. And initially, when we started looking at this project to say, what went wrong, why is council having questions, or why are we not reporting the results that we'd like, and the first thing that came to our attention was just really the reporting. We didn't have a consistent way to approach when and how and what information council received. And I think most people would agree, and I've watched that council has been more receptive to the types of reports that staff has brought forward, and it's been easier to stay on top of, I guess, any concerns or threatened, I guess, is one of the words that's used, threatened projects, budgets, and the like. And so we focused on that performance reporting, and we said we need to establish we need to have a system for facilitating that timely project reporting. Unfortunately, we're doing some things manually, or we're having systems not talking to each other. And so it takes a little extra time to put that information together. Also, a percentage of completion reporting requirement would really improve the project tracking, and that's something we really are encouraging departments to focus on. General Service is working on a new template and developing a monthly report, and so we're really optimistic that that's going to address that question, that concern. Next slide. The use of the construction manager at risk. It's one method of delivery, and it's probably not even the best person to explain what the CMAR is, other than the fact that you have a choice between how many contractors do you use, general contractors, who's in charge, how much of the risk you can push off to a contractor who's in charge of all these things. And we had some interesting conversations on this, because some departments use one contract and some use two, and our external contractor, our external expert that we brought in, had an opinion as to how we should do things. And we ended up saying, well, as long as legal will support either approach, one or two contracts. And so there's different approaches, and we will follow them closely. But our findings there is that we need some more independent evaluations of subcontractors' bids. And some people think, well, once you've put it out to bid, that is your independent review. Whatever comes in, that's competition. But we think we need to allocate some more resources to reviewing those bids that come in for subcontractors. And when they're out of expectation, we need to challenge that or make sure we understand what the differences are, and not just say, well, it all came out, some were higher, some were lower. And so we want to ensure the negotiation of contract terms does not delay trade package bidding, and we have a couple examples in our report as to how this negatively impacted us. So general services, just to wrap this up, general services is going to ensure the CMAR and independent cost estimators evaluate the bids and update our manuals to be consistent.
Ms. Ajmera, did you have a question?
Yes, I have a question on this. Mr. McDowell,
Yes, ma'am.
I appreciate the recommendation here where we have more independent evaluation of subcontractors' bids. Have you looked at our MWSBE as it relates to this, and any?
What?
Mr.
Sorry,
Driggs,
I'm talking to, I'm being assisted here in the meeting, so I need to put him down. Sorry, go ahead.
No. So, Mr. McDowell, have you looked at MWSBE bids as it comes to subcontracting, when it comes to independent evaluation?
Not as a part of this audit, no. We're certainly aware of concerns that we might have, and we have looked at our overall management, but I'd have to go back a couple of years to see, to give you a better explanation of what audits we've had that have focused on MWB.
Right, there have been some concerns that have been raised where there is not really a quantitative process when it comes to subcontractors' bids for MWB. So I would be interested in hearing your recommendations.
I think that would actually be a different charge to the auditor, and it is another entirely different topic of conversation, possibly one that really ought to be in Councilmember Mitchell's committee, because he is heavily engaged in that. I mean, clearly we can look at it, but once again, what I'm seeing here is a response to a lot of the questions we had when issues like the Cross Charlotte Trail, the JCC, and other projects just came in kind of wildly off target. And personally, I'm very happy to see this, because it suggests to me that the reasons that those things happen have been identified or are being pointed out to us here and in the extended report. And we need to think about how we follow up, or what conversation we have with the manager. I don't mean to deflect your question, Ms. Ajmera, but that's a whole different can of worms, the issues around MWSBE. In this case, what we're talking about is these procedures. And I would mention construction manager at risk is one basis on which you can basically contract with somebody. There's design, build, operate, manage. There's what used to be called, that was called D-BOM, I think. And then there was DF-BOM, which is you throw finance in there as well. And the choice among those different models for negotiating comes down to basically how you allocate risks, I would say, as a principal thing. So if you have something like a turnkey project and you tell the contractor, we're going to pay you so much money and you're going to do this for us, and anything after that is your problem. What has concerned me is that I thought a couple of our contracts were like that, where we were protected because the construction manager was at risk, And then we got told, no, there are overruns. And the subcontractors didn't come in where we thought they would. And so then you wonder if using that basis was the right idea in the first place, i.e., should we have negotiated differently and not left to the manager of the contract a lot of the responsibility? So I guess my question for the committee and for all of us is, if you look at the second slide, I think it was, which pulls all this together, the conclusion slide, and it says the city is not consistent to use best practices to manage large capital projects. The question is, what are we doing about that? Greg, you and I spoke, and forgive me for being familiar and calling you by your first name, but you and I spoke about this, and I think the impression I got from you was that we are sort of making progress, that the change we made to the $20 million fund and changing the sequence of how we approach capital projects was helping the situation, so that we didn't have situations where bonds, for example, have been authorized and then the project itself didn't even get started until the end of the authority that we had for the bonds. So what is your sense of where we are right now?
Well, I'm going to be, if you let me talk a lot or come to more meetings, and over the years you'll hear me say a similar thing, which is that the city is a good organization that wants to get better. I'm at the 30,000-foot level, and so you really will have to look at some of the responses to see, for example, that out of 68 responses, most of the time departments are saying, yeah, we accept that recommendation, we can do a little bit more. Multiple times I've said, though, that auditors, particularly in construction, expect to find or question or even recover 1 or 2% of what the owners are doing. If we find 5 or 10%, then you need to really do a better job. If we find less than that, you're spending a lot of time on contract management, or I'm just not a very good auditor. So try to use that as the perspective that good organization can get better. Yes, there's 22 recommendations in this, but we spent a lot of time. It was kind of a broad scoped audit. It was only after a few months that the city manager asked us to add CMAR as a specific thing because we had issues with the Joint Communications Center, the Charlotte Convention Center renovation, and he said he was going to tell you council members, have the auditor look and say, well, is the problem the CMAR method of delivery? And we said, no, we didn't find that. So it's a broad scoped audit, many findings and recommendations, and I would not be shy about coming back to you and saying, the city has a real problem and needs to fix it. You need to, hire more auditors or do things completely different. That's not my message today. My message today is again, kind of a continuing, cities improving things. When the city manager wants somebody to take a closer look, he brings me in and asks me to give, my opinion. And so with my staff and a couple of contractors that we hired to help us out, I went back and looked through all these responses, and I tried to, again, a conclusion, you want it to be fairly brief, and it's hard to do that with 22 recommendations, but the level of detail we gave was to really help the city in those 5 different areas that we focused on.
Would you be able to give us a score in comparison with other large cities as to the quality of these processes? I mean, is the stuff you're talking about fairly typical in large cities, or do you think we have a real issue?
We looked at a number of other cities. We looked at other audit departments that have done this type of audit, and they find similar issues. I think the question is, what's the receptivity of people to audit recommendations? And we have a robust recommendation follow-up plan and process. And so once people tell us they're going to look at things, they're going to change things, they're going to do things differently, we follow up with them. If you scan through the report, you'll see some areas where we say, here's actions that have already been taken. It's really hard to compare us to others. I would say that, time and time again, after having been with this fine city for 20 years, it's a good organization. But as you know, so many areas is very broad, and is an organization, does it want to continue to improve? And the fact that the city manager asks internal audit to look into things like this says, yes, we do want to improve. And I've had that conversation with many bosses over the years, and it's like, well, if I find something negative, where do we go from there? You know, am I going to be your best friend?
Right.
And a good manager, as I've been fortunate to have, always says, well, it may be tough to swallow, but we want to improve, so put it out there on the table. So I'm not doing
Okay.
I'm not doing anybody any good if I don't tell them my honest, independent opinion.
All right, thank you. Ms. Ajmera, did you want to say something?
Yeah, so a couple of points I'd like to make here. Mr. McDowell, have you looked at, as it relates to some of these projects that we had issues with, such as Cross Charlotte Trail and other huge capital projects, where we had seen change in scope compared to what was the
Yes.
promises that were made? And what are your recommendations in terms of the scope that had been changed from the commitments that had been made to constituents?
The number one thing is that we need to communicate, and we need to report, for example, the percentage of completion. We need to communicate up front how sure we are of our estimates. And so, you know, sometimes, as when CATS does design estimates, they'll say we're at 30%, we're at 60%. And sometimes we've found that the staff has not been clear when they put a project on the table as to how much design has gone into it. And so you might have a different opinion, you might have a different reception if we told you, as water does sometimes, well, we at 15%, that's enough for us to put it on the table and say, here's something that we're initially working on. That's a different story than if we say we've done 30 or 60% design work and feel better going forward. So I know the manager has laid out, for example, how he's going to handle the Cross Charlotte Trail and the different segments. And so there are a number of segments that we haven't put a dollar amount around because we haven't done the design work. So again, the new program goes a long ways towards that.
In terms of the new process, I understand when you have some of these recommendations, when you present it to the committee, as it relates to existing findings, we might see a bigger scope of certain audit requests. So I think committee should be open to making those recommendations, not to the auditor directly, but to our manager that, I see here are the recommendations as it relates to the existing scope, but I think we need to take a step further, in this case, subcontractors rates for MWSBE. So we are not shying away from making recommendations when it comes to audit requests. One last question for Mr. McDowell. When you look at the processes, do you also make recommendations when it comes to streamlining our existing processes or the budget request?
I certainly could. I can't think of any offhand as to streamlining or budget related. Internal audit tries to kind of find where we can plug in, not to duplicate everything that the city is doing. I mean, you could argue that everything internal audit does is duplicating we're looking over someone's shoulder and we're giving an opinion as to whether or not they could do it better. And but there are still some organizations need get the benefit of that internal audit. Yeah, it's the selection process as to where can internal audit be best employed.
I think we need to move on to our last topic, but Greg, do you think if we plan to have you come and see us again in about 3 months, would you be able to report on any significant progress over that time frame, or what are your expectations as a result of this report?
I think 3 months might be pretty good to give you an update as to the responses that people have given us and how they're progressing on that. Like I said, there's a number of recommendations that are already have been addressed or are in the process of being addressed. And I'm sure, Mr. Driggs, when you get into it, you'll want to talk about many of those 102 pages.
Yeah, I can't wait. So, colleagues, if it's okay, I would like to suggest, I feel this is important. It's not exactly sexy, but when you think of some of the conversations we've had over the last couple of years, we need to get these things right. So first of all, if we could follow up maybe in 3 months and have you just let us know how we're doing there. The other thing is, I'm wondering whether we should tell the full council something about this report. And my thought was maybe that when we have the report out from committee chairs, that we incorporate in there a kind of a synopsis or an abbreviated version of it, if everybody is in agreement with that. It seems to me something that they ought to be aware of. I don't know how much detail they need to have, but if we have a sentence there, like the city has not consistently used best practices to manage large capital projects, I think we should stay on top of it. So without objection, if there is none, Ryan, could you work with Greg maybe to draft something that we could use as a report?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, good. Unless somebody has something else on that, thank you, Greg. Very helpful.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Appreciate it. Yeah.
I have a comment, Mr. Driggs.
Oh, yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea, what you said, to give a report to full council, especially since Mr. McDowell said that this information is on the website or it's public information, so that would be great to share with council. Can you give us the website where that information can be found?
You can find us on CNET if you're internal, or on the city's normal website. Just look for the Internal Audit Department. You look under the drop down for departments, find internal audit, and we have about 3 years worth of audit plans and status, and we post a monthly status, and we have about, I forget the last time I counted, 6 or 7 years worth of audits, at least a good 100 audit reports that we've issued available for your pleasure and reading.
Okay, thank you.
And if you can't find it, just call me. I'll help you. I'll walk you through it.
And we will read them
thank
all
you.
for next time, Greg. Thanks.
There you go. There you go. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Our last topic today has to do with city council resolutions. And this got referred to us as a result of a number of proposals for resolutions that raised questions about when exactly a resolution is appropriate. So I'm going to hand off to Patrick Baker to, I guess, lay some groundwork for that. Right, Patrick?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Driggs. Members of the committee, this was a referral that was dated February the 3rd, as you can see on your screen, specifically in response to a bit of a wave, I guess, from a Charlotte perspective. I come from Durham. It seemed like there was a resolution every council meeting. Durham likes to do resolutions, and I think that that's a new process here in Charlotte. But what I've been asked to do is to assist the committee in developing a process or a policy, should the committee decide to go forward with a policy as it relates to considering resolutions. Right now, you do not have any specific policy that relates to resolutions. It is simply you just go through the normal agenda process, and with all of your agenda items, it requires 6 votes to pass. But the question ultimately, and you see some of the considerations, and if you can go to the second page on the committee charge, you see the policy question there. Can the committee develop a more formal process by which council considers future resolution requests? A review of any applicable policies from our peer cities and cities in North Carolina. I can tell you anecdotally that cities in North Carolina, I'm not aware of any that have a particular policy or procedure as it relates to resolutions beyond the standard process of considering an item in their agenda process and passing that item. But I will have a more formal report at your next meeting. Reached out to some, but not all of the peer cities as well, and I'm not finding any specific processes or procedures as it relates to the consideration of a resolution. But specifically, the final sentence there, the charge should also address, but is not limited to, the following considerations. And you see 3 categories that have been proposed of potential ways to more formalize the process. by subject matter of the resolution, whether it falls under the direct purview of another agency or institution, whether the resolution does it have to receive unanimous support from the city council to be a city council resolution, and resolutions that may be considered controversial within the community. So my plan is to get some feedback from you all in terms of what you'd like to see, what you'd like for me to come back to you with. Particularly interested in hearing if there are other categories that you'd like to consider, and then I'll take that direction from you all to come back with you to respond to whatever questions that you have of me, whatever directive that you provide me today. So I'll stop there and take any questions.
Did anybody have a hand up? I can't see the hands here.
I have a question, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead.
I guess it's more of a statement for Mr. Baker. I personally struggle to support council resolutions that don't have any action behind them. So just making a statement, I think, is something that, I just question if that, I don't know if that fits into a category, but I do think that that's one area that we have gotten a little bit tripped up with in the past by making a resolution. An example being the Strategic Energy Action Plan. When we looked at, I think it was in 2017, 2019, I'm losing my days. We were going to just pass a resolution to say that we support it, but we hadn't done any work behind that to come up with any kind of a plan. So then once staff, put together a pretty thorough plan, we passed it. So I think that's one thing that I would like to include in the committee charge or in the policy question is what actions are actually a part of the city's, within the city's purview to do that would be behind the resolution.
Okay.
I would like to respond to that, Mr. Driggs.
Yeah, go ahead.
I hear what Mayor Pro Tem is saying when we're not able to take an action, and when we pass a resolution, what does it really mean? I'll give you an example where when there was ICE raids, a community was asking for us to pass a resolution, and they wanted us to take a strong stance. Not so much because we can do something, but because they wanted support from the city. And I understand in those situations where we might have to make a statement where it creates further trust with our CMPD, where immigrant community would speak up. So there might be an exceptions to certain scenarios where community is asking us to step up and speak up in certain situations. So I would like us to consider those resolutions where our voice is so important in the process. So that's really, I just wanted to make sure that I share my thoughts on that.
Sure. And to respond to that, in that case, the community did want us to respond to the adverse circumstances that the immigrant community was experiencing, mostly from the federal government. And we did. We had the immigrant task force that met and tried to respond to questions. So we did take action related to that. So where I think we have a problem is when we want to pass a resolution that comes from an emotional issue and we're either not willing to take action or we don't have any action that we can take. And then you get other groups that come in and said, well, you didn't do anything for us. We asked you to do something. You didn't respond to us. And so then it becomes very difficult as to where you draw the line. And that's what I just think we should be mindful of.
I think there are different kinds of resolutions, which is partly reflected in this conversation. If we have a resolution that's kind of an affirmation of our values, possibly some people would think that at certain points in time that was important because of public dismay about something that has happened. Some of the resolutions get political in nature, and they amount to more of a criticism of a different level of government or whatever. So I think the reason we're having this conversation is to try and decide, taking on board what Mayor Pro Tem said, what sort of things is it appropriate for the city to want to talk about in a resolution? There are other things like the immigrant situation where we didn't pass a resolution, we took action. And at the end of the day, on the energy thing. And Mayor Pro Tem, you may remember I was pretty adamant in resisting that resolution, which was in the last meeting of the term of the prior mayor. And it would have been great, made some people feel good, and it would not have committed us to anything. So, Mr. Baker, getting back to your framework, I think our idea here is to try and define what a resolution is, what the process is for bringing it forward. I mean, as it stands right now, can a member of council just draft a resolution and then circulate it and bring it up for a vote? Or how would it happen today?
Yeah, typically what would happen is there are a couple of ways of getting on the agenda. I believe the mayor has some flexibility because I know she does proclamations. That's a separate issue from resolutions. But generally speaking, someone would draft the resolution and circulate it to the group, and it would be added to an agenda at some point in time to be voted on and again, you need 6 votes to be able to pass the resolution.
So one of the issues about that, which I can attest to myself, is that the resolution is then a statement by the city of Charlotte, and it becomes binding on everybody. And you could have 3 or 4 members that are really not in agreement at all with the resolution, and a question as to whether we should require unanimity if this is going to be a position taken by city council. So one issue to consider is what kind of a vote does it take? Supermajority, unanimous, and can the mayor offer a resolution the same way the rest of us do? Does it have to be put on the agenda for a future meeting? Like, is it an item that needs to appear on the agenda?
Yeah, typically that's how it would happen. Is that it would because you certainly want to have the public be able to know what it is that you are doing. So that's typically the best way to do that, is to go ahead and put it on the printed agenda for consideration.
So I guess question for the committee, is this something we want to try and legislate? Can we legislate this? Can we kind of exclude things that the majority of us would probably oppose and not create incidental consequences that we didn't have in mind? I mean, what's the feeling about this?
My position is, this is Malcolm, is that we ought to keep it simple, that resolutions are not a monthly thing or every other month thing. It comes up when something happens where I believe the council or a majority of the council, which is 6, believe strongly about that they want to lend the weight of the city behind it in a resolution, similar to any vote that we may take that take 6 votes. I don't think a resolution should have a majority or 11 votes. And I think the parameters around it really are to be kept simple and addressed because the infrequency of them on a case-by-case scenario based on the topic matter. Some topic matters may require an immediate response, i.e. The president sending in federal troops to a city may deserve a resolution that the city should speak from. And I don't think that needs 11 votes to pass. I think it's something that, as a community, as an example, have a council member were to want to put something forth condemning that action, that we should allow that process to happen and not put a whole lot of parameters about how it happens. So my thing, Ed, would to be to keep it simple and not to put a whole lot of requirements on the resolution simply because of the infrequency of it occurring.
Well, I think this came up because it felt like there was a point in time at which we had a number of proposals for resolutions, and ordinarily in the past, I'm not sure that we did think we needed to do anything about this. And then a lot of high intensity stuff started to happen. For example, to take your instance, if the president is talking about sending federal troops into cities, then I think we're within our right as being the destination of some of those troops potentially to talk about that. If we disagree with something that the president is doing about national immigration policies and stuff, I think the people can express their opinion through their votes at the national level about that. And I don't see why we need to involve ourselves in that and incur the risk of dysfunctionality in our relationship with some of those other entities, i.e. for us to pass resolutions about things over which we have no control invites kind of consequences. And we do need to appreciate that on some of these things, there are strong feelings on all sides. And so to disenfranchise the minority and have the city, Charlotte, make a statement about its position, if it has no real bearing, i.e., again, it's not something that's in our wheelhouse, we're not responsible for it. I would just, ideally, I would hope that we could count on council members themselves to choose the right occasions for a majority vote. But we've had to deal with some proposals that could have really been unhelpful. So that's why there's a question now as to whether we should have at least some parameters around what a resolution is and what the appropriate time is for us to be issuing one.
I agree with Mr. Graham. I think we should keep it simple. Yeah, I think everything we do is based on a majority vote. So, I mean, that's just how we operate. We operate on what the majority of us think. So to make a special, not special, but different concession or different rules for a resolution, which we don't have that often, I think is just creating another policy when we have so many more priorities. So I think I find it interesting that Mr. Baker said that one council member could propose a resolution to be placed on the agenda when it takes more than that to place other items on the agenda. So I think that I think we should have a unilateral rule for our voice. I don't think we need to make a special rule for resolution.
Mr. Baker, what Ms. Johnson is referring to is our process for putting stuff on the agenda by majority vote and so on. So a single council member, by offering a resolution, can't cause it to be placed on our agenda. Is that right?
Not for that night. A single council person can ask for anything to be placed on a future agenda, can ask the manager to put something on a future agenda. And unless there is an objection from another council member or the manager, then that matter would be taken up at a future council agenda.
Which means the whole council would be made aware of the fact that that request had been made in order to be able to object.
That's correct.
Okay, so we haven't heard from everybody yet. Mayor Pro Tem?
Well, I was just going to, in case there was any ambiguity, I just have my own reasons for not supporting resolutions that don't have actions behind them that we can take. But I kind of agree with Mr. Graham that let's just keep it simple because these generally come out of emotional topics and issues. And so everyone is a little bit different. I do think it's worth a conversation with full council of the ramifications of putting resolutions up there when some groups then, the floodgates open, and that's what happened with our last resolution. So it's just something more to talk about. I don't know that you can really codify anything.
I think that's right, and I accept the kind of majority view comment. The difficulty is when you look at things like the implications for intergovernmental relations and so on, some of the resolutions that have been suggested in the past would have inflamed our relationship with Raleigh and not yielded any benefit. And we just need to be responsible about not cutting off our nose to spite our own face with some of these statements. And I think that was the concern.
Can I make a comment?
Yeah.
Thank you. I agree with Mr. Graham. We need this process as simple as possible, less parameters. So I don't want us to now go from having a majority support to unanimous support. I would not support that.
No, I think it's clear that that's not where we're coming out. My takeaway from this conversation is there isn't a whole lot of enthusiasm on this committee for trying to legislate around resolutions. Maybe we could pass a resolution that says there will only be a certain number of resolutions in a year. All right. I don't have anything else to offer on that subject. And Mr. Baker, I'm not sure that there's a basis for you to propose anything. I would like to get back to the mayor, who felt, I think, on one or two occasions, very pressured by council proposals for resolutions, because she has a lot of things she needs to think about, and sometimes she was worried about the impact some of them that have been considered might have had. But I would say for today, why don't we let this one rest? And I see that it is 3 o'clock. So does anybody else have anything? If not, do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Yeah, I think that's a majority. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks.